Hello everyone, what's up? This is the Rochford Files with your host Andrew Rochford. And today it's Friday, June 18th. And we're ready for another stack show. Of pre-Juneteenth edition. Just promote the stream on Facebook and we'll be ready to go. So it's been interesting. So we got a lot to cover today. I'm going to start off with the Joe Manchin voting rights compromise. Going to talk some Supreme Court. Then we'll get into some imperialism analysis. As well, among other things, on today's show. Then the usual propaganda that takes place in this failed state of elite capitalism called the United States. And with that being said, I think it's a good time to get started. Okay. I got the wrong window set. But I will fix that shortly. There we go. Now we got the right set of tabs ready. Let's start off with the Joe Manchin voting rights compromise that just came through yesterday. Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia has circulated a list of demands for voting legislation among his Democratic colleagues, indicating he may be willing to consider a revised version of the sweeping voting and election reform bill that the Senate will take up at the end of the month. Manchin previously expressed his opposition to S1, known as For the People Act, raising concerns about passing the legislation supporters of the bill noted several Republican-led states are enacting laws that would restrict voting rights among party lines, and say S1 is necessary to counter these actions. Manchin told reporters on Wednesday that he had shared with his colleagues things that I can support and vote with in the For the People Act. People are assuming I was against S1 because there was no Republican supporting it. That's not the case at all. I said basically you should not pass any type of voter bill in the most divisive time of our life unless you have some unity on this thing. Because you can just divide the country further. There's good old bipartisan Joe. He has such a great level of concern for the people. The Republican Party, that is. But let's be real. The Republican Party is never saying things like, oh, I'm really concerned about being divisive to liberals. And our fellow Democratic colleagues know they're ideology is based on only the liberals, while the one-way street of bipartisanship kicks in. Oh, we gotta make this bill more palatable for Republicans, only to get 0 votes. What we do? According to a list obtained by CBS News, these areas of support include provisions banning partisan gerrymandering and mandating at least 15 consecutive days of early voting for federal elections. Manchin's list also includes areas of compromise relating to ethics and campaign finance. However, he supports some provisions that could be unpopular with progressive Democrats, such as requiring voter ID with reliable alternatives for providing proof of identity to vote and allowing election officials to purge voter rolls. He also does not appear to support no-excuse mail-in ballot voting, although he would want to require states to send absentee ballots to eligible voters ahead of an election. Alright, so we know the common reasons that people would be against the mail-in the voter ID, and the main reason for that is being that it's a form of a poll tax. Although people should not be in a position where they have to get an ID to vote as their primary reason of voting. Although what you'll notice is your normal Democrats are usually more loose on the idea of the required voter ID. And we've also got Manchin compromising the campaign finance. We know with Manchin and his billionaire donors that the last thing he would want to do is fully alienate those donors that he isn't afraid to work for. However, being in favor of purging voters is not a good thing, regardless of which party you're under. People should maintain their permanent registration when it comes to voting and not be kicked off due to inactivity. Given how fucked up this current voting system is, and how so often you're left with two shit choices, kicking people off for their refusal to choose which choice of shit they prefer more is not will not be a good thing regardless of which party you're under. The list also does not address one of the most controversial campaign finance portions of the bill, which would provide public financing for congressional elections. Back to once again why the guy like Manchin, who will not pretend to work for those billionaires and be deceitful in that regard compared to some of the other Democratic politicians who pretend to be fair people. Manchin is not one of those people who will be deceitful with the platitudes and whatnot, which means even because he is not afraid to, the unpopular Democratic hero, he sandbagged a lot so far. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on Wednesday began the process to bring the legislation to the Senate floor for consideration next week. In a speech on the Senate floor on Thursday, Schumer said that we Democrats wish a voting rights bill would be bipartisan, but added the Washington Republicans seem dead set against all remedies. Once again, what is the point of compromising for a group of Republicans who are dead set on not voting for it, regardless of if they are in charge and decide to push the same bill? The idea that we have some kind of bipartisan solution to this partisan attack on democracy befools me, Schumer says. And will that still be federal rule in 2024 when Republicans take back the House and Senate because Democrats like Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, and several more are working in the shadows, waiting to sandbag any type of bill which would compel people to vote to help Democrats maintain at least the same margins in the House and Senate? Schumer told reporters later on Thursday that the Senate would vote on a motion to proceed with the bill next Tuesday. Manchin is currently the lone Democrat who is not a co-sponsor of the bill. He told reporters on Thursday that he had been in contact with Stacey Abrams, a former Georgia gubernatorial candidate and voting rights activist, to discuss the bill along with other stakeholders. I've been working across the aisle with Republicans to trying to get people to understand that's the bedrock of our democracy, an accessible, fair, and basically secure vote. And Mitch McConnell is just going to go through and tell you any little thing isn't flat out unreasonable to him. Abrams threw their support behind the bill on Thursday. The Republican Senator Roy Blunt said this endorsement is proof that the amended bill will be too liberal. Stacey Abrams immediately endorsed Senator Manchin's proposal. It became the Stacey Abrams substitute, not the Joe Manchin, Blunt said in a press conference. And that's one of the things I noticed is how this is how they're recognizing their opposition to the bill is because of Stacey Abrams, the black woman who is willing to throw her support behind a watered down Manchin compromise. And when you're anyone who is not in that right-wing echo chamber will know that this is clearly the Manchin compromise. Well, one positive of this bill, then the basic points that Manchin is willing to support is he is not directly in favor of the bad parts of the bill, such as the ones that would kick off, which would really make third-party building impossible. I could be wrong on that, but from the looks of it, he is not directly opposing that, like Abrams for the People Act would do. And I would be strongly opposed to the idea of a bill which would make it even more impossible for a third party to go off the ground. So next, let's play this interview from Stacey Abrams yesterday on CNN, talking about her getting on board with Manchin's compromise. Come on, no. Manage this load. Now, wait for this video to load. Just keep in mind that Stacey Abrams is not as progressive as you think she is, and she is a opportunist. And that's one point that I want to get across clearly on that. And I'm going to try to refresh and see if it'll play on the reload. Especially since Abrams was willing to support Mike Bloomberg rather than the host of the other 20-some-odd Democrats that are in that loaded primary field, which is really baffling to me. And you saw her fall flat on live national television, and Joe Biden wouldn't give her any prominent position in the Biden campaign. So that's it. If there's one thing about Stacey Abrams is she doesn't know how to look the other team window. Especially if you are trying to be more progressive, which she did show some of those tendencies in her campaign against Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. It doesn't look like I'm going to be able to get this video to load, but it's getting closer. But the point is, there we go. Almost there. that this watered down compromise among the better things that this bill could do, minus the third party killing portions of it. And to get it to another point, once again, Senator Joe Manchin is not. He was very wavering on the filibuster. And we would need to remove that filibuster even just to get his watered down proposal changed. So when it comes down to it, it's likely a dead end unless you get it done in the simple majority period. And based on all indications that currently exist, it looks like they're going to use that simple majority vote to be towards the infrastructure rather than voting rights. And when they make Juneteenth an official holiday, politicians are going to give black people further reward by making it harder for them to vote, make it to where they rethink the idea of spending an hour or more in long lines, especially across the South, when they went to the polling exits. So once again, Joe Manchin overall is trying to win over centrist, and hell, even portions of the left on this. If there's one thing that he's trying to do is send the mixed signals that he can still be reasonable on certain issues, and fortunately certain liberals are gonna fall for this shit, when the reality is this is all performative coming from Senator Joe Manchin. And at the end of the day, he is still a dino. And you're still gonna fall for it. Too many people are still gonna fall for the wishy-washy Joe Manchin. I mean, come on, he's a headline every week. Joe Manchin is the guy that comes up on independent left news because of him sandbagging anything that would be more than incrementalism from the Democratic Party. And his opportunity. The ratchet effect is he can virtue signal bills like these because you know that they'll get no win. And that's what's going to happen next week. And my bet is they're not even going to reach 50 votes. You can take that to the bank. This is one thing that I missed during the on Wednesday that I thought it'd be very important to discuss from Joe Biden at that in Geneva. And once again, it looks like this video is not going to load for me. Fortunately, that sucks. But at least this quote here is a better... It better covers what he says, even though I'd rather have my viewers hear it from him himself. How would it be that the United States were viewed by the rest of the world as interfering with the elections directly of other countries and everyone knew it? What would it be like if we engaged in activities that he engaged in? It diminishes the standing of the country. So this is like a babyface wrestling promo where the crowd automatically, a lot of the crowd already hates him, and they can see right through this bullshit. If there's anything the United States does in mass, it's meddle in elections of several other countries, especially those brown and black countries. They do a lot. And even some select white countries. The truth is, it wasn't the Russians who interfered in either of these past two elections. It's the United States who actually tried to interfere in Russian elections. And let me find the image of that shows a big-ass list of all the countries that the United States interfered in. Which is at least 80 times that the United States has tried, at minimum, has tried to interfere in the elections of other countries. And here's a photo showing all the places in the world where the United States interfered in elections. And yes, they even did more social white countries as well, so Albania, Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Bulgaria, Cambodia, Chile, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Greece, Grenada, Guatemala, Guyana, Haiti, Iceland, Indonesia, Iran, Israel, Italy, Jamaica, Japan, Lebanon, Malaysia, Malta, Mauritius, Nepal, Nicaragua, Panama, Peru, Philippines, Romania, Russia, San Marino, Slovakia, Somalia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Ukraine, United Kingdom, Uruguay. Just an example. And the overwhelming majority of those countries have some form of socialism in place. And they really got you thinking that the United States, yes, that United States, is out there protecting democracy in those countries. And the truth is, they're attempting coups to make those, if they don't, they do more than just interfere in elections. They're also trying to enact coups in those socialist countries, especially Venezuela, Bolivia, Peru, by installing right-wing agents. That's the United States idea of what they want among the world. They want first, second, third, fourth world right-wing whole states. They don't want a socialist world showing, or social democracy showing people that you have a, they don't want you to be able to point to examples of even successful social democracies. They only want the people, especially in the United States, and the rest of the world, to only be able to have you look in the mirror and just see right-wing countries. Hello to you, SS_Germanic_use. I'm going to jump past the Supreme Court rulings because I think the United States interference makes sense to tie into imperialism. And thank you to Asalrod for sharing this article yesterday. The effects of American racial bias and anti-Asian sentiment do not end at the nation's borders. The racial attitudes of white people also influence their support for American military intervention abroad, according to our working paper on U.S. foreign policy and racism. White people who hold racist beliefs are significantly more likely to endorse aggressive military interventions over diplomacy or economic strategies in foreign countries at odds with the United States. If residents of those countries are perceived as non-white, this is particularly true when it comes to China. Once again, those white Americans who hold supremacist beliefs, they aren't just the hard right-wingers. They're also your liberals, and you've even got some on the American left who will let the shit slide as long as they get healthcare, better healthcare, and some other improved domestic safety nets, especially when they're class, and won't be with you when it's time to fight for reparations. Race and public opinion. Researchers have long known that race and racism powerfully shape white Americans' views on domestic issues like social welfare and criminal justice. Scholars have given less attention to how the racial resentment harbored by white people influences their foreign policy views, in part because the typical voter cares less about foreign policy than the domestic policies that affect their everyday lives. Hold on for a moment. I'm gonna get some water. Alright, I'm about to tweet this real quick before I go any further. So I'm about to go in on white people who don't care about foreign policy. And that last sentence I read before I went to go get some water just nailed what a lot of leftists of color have criticism on when it comes to the white progressive. They're willing to let the atrocities that happen with Palestinians, for example, Syrians, they just don't care enough to hold politicians accountable. And right now, the only real tool we have to do that is withholding our vote from the two-party system. Because foreign policy is connected with domestic policy. Remember that the IDF is trained the same way as this fascist police force that we have here in the United States. You've got no fucking chance of having a properly defunded police if you're not willing to have solidarity for the Palestinians. I'm not sure what's going on with my mic, but I think I'll turn it down a bit. See if that's the issue. And then bring the max volume down a bit. Let me know if that's better. Scholars have given less attention to how the racial resentment harbored by white people influences their foreign policy views, in part because the typical voter cares less about voter policy than domestic policies that affect their everyday lives. Okay, I'm going to go to properties real quick. Okay, let's see if that's fixed. I think I should sound better now. I just selected the right mic. But tensions between the United States and another country escalate, as they have lately with Iran, North Korea, and China. Popular interest in foreign policy rises. That can influence foreign policy decisions. To analyze how racial attitudes affect support for U.S. military action abroad, we have examined 30 years of public opinion data collected by one of the country's longest running national public opinion surveys, the American National Election Study. Our analysis focused on answers by white Americans from 1986 to 2016. Specifically, we examined their responses to the racial resentment scale. Social scientists use this meticulously tested set of questions to assess anti-black prejudice in the post-civil rights era. In recent decades, white Americans have become less willing to express explicitly racist views such as opposing interracial marriage or supporting segregation, but they still may harbor bigoted perceptions, doubting black Americans' work ethic or commitment to self-reliance. For example, the racial resentment is designed to capture this kind of discriminatory anti-black views. Social scientists have repeatedly demonstrated that white people who hold such views are also likely to hold negative views of other non-white populations, such as Latinos, immigrants, Muslim Americans, and Asian Americans. Keep in mind that this isn't just exclusive to your committed Republicans. What you'll see is when Republicans are in charge, you have a bunch of liberals who become immigration activists. They're pro Black Lives Matter. They're pro Stop Asian Hate. But the problem is, they flip-flop on that. They go from being activists on those issues, but then when they change with the party, and we can't have that because they went from being outraged about what happened at the border in President Trump's administration, but when it came to things getting worse, even more packed cages, while COVID is still a problem,
They don't care because they're at brunch or they feel like it's right under when a Democrat's in charge. And we can't have that. Based on responses to the racial resentment scale in most recent American national election studies administered in 2012 and 2016 to about 3,000 non Hispanic white respondents each, we found that racist attitudes are correlated with and meaningfully influence white American support for U.S. military interventions in other countries. For example, people with racist attitudes favored more aggressive action against Iran. 35% would support bombing Iranian suspected nuclear development sites, compared to 15% of whites with less racist attitudes and 31% of white Americans overall. So it's not all on white people directly, but they are part of the biggest group of people in the most propagandized country in the world. It's them that are being duped most by this two-party system, this so-called duopoly. Yes, it's... And when they hear pundits on CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox talk about how this intervention is necessary and how you can't have the any type of budget cut to the military industrial complex when it still outspends the next 7 countries on the list. It's crazy. White Americans with racist views also favor military engagement against Muslim populations. For example, they are 5 percentage points more supportive of continuing the global war on terror than the overall white population. 46 to 41%. Because a number of factors influence people's foreign policy opinions, including educational status, income, gender, ideology, military service, and partisan affiliation. We adjusted for these in our study. We also controlled for respondents' reported attention to political news, their level of white ethnocentrism, and their authoritarian leanings. We found that racial resentment has a significant effect above and beyond these other variables. And I think this paragraph brings on another point that there's so you'll see the issue with being pro-military, and the problem with the military itself is the action it takes. And it's less about every single person that's involved in it. Because a lot of these people that do join the military, it got done due to the poverty draft. Although you'll also have some people who are joined due to how propagandized they are to the military industrial complex as well. So you have to keep in mind the groups of people who are involved with the military and the blind support that certain white people give to the military. And I do not blindly support the actions of the military system, just to be clear, but I also not attacking the people who felt like their only way to work their way up is to serve in the military because of the carrot they dangle of free college. Anti-China views. Racial resentments seem especially influential in white American views of China, which has become an economic and political competitor to the United States over the last decade. In 2012, of the 3,196 white Americans surveyed in the American National Election Survey, 28% believed that China posed a major military threat to the United States. 53% saw China as a minor threat, and 19% did not see China as a threat. So my answer to that is I don't truly know the type of threat China is. That's going to be the best answer I could have. And it's really fear-mongering which is led by the Republican Party, but it's also not properly opposed by Democrats, so they're complicit to this as well, as I said, because they only provide slight opposition to it when they should really provide a much stronger opposition to the anti-China fear-mongering that is permeated through the media. In 2016, 3,505 white Americans answered the same survey questions about China. 45% saw China as a major threat to the United States. 43% saw it as a minor threat. Only 11% of whites believe that China presented no threat to the United States. Again, racial attitudes strongly shape these perceptions. Our analysis found that whites with racist attitude were 20 percentage points more likely to consider China a major threat than other whites. And I imagine that number is only going to get higher when with consideration to the anti-China sentiments that I'm sure have grown since the coronavirus, since the right only likes to blame China for COVID. Again, racial attitudes strongly shape these perceptions. Our analysis found that whites with... I read that right. While at first glance this might suggest racial attitudes were less of a factor in 2016 than 2012, the lower percentage reflects the fact that a much higher percentage of Americans viewed China as a threat in 2016 than 2012. This trend continued during the presidency of Donald Trump, who portrayed China as a great adversary, calling it a threat to the world. Today, 22% of all Americans see China as the greatest enemy of the United States, according to a 2020 Gallup poll. And I remember seeing a poll like this a couple months ago, and I was amazed at how little people saw our own country, the United States, as the greatest threat. I believe that was only 5%, 11%. So I honestly found that, well, I'm not surprised given what the two-party duopoly entails. But there's so much more work to be done to get people aware of how much of a problem the United States is its own biggest enemy right now. And there's too few people that are rightfully pointing that out. A vicious cycle. Americans' growing perception of China as a threat comes as both countries compete for control over the South China Sea. China and the United States routinely deploy weapons and engage in military planning and exercises in the South China Sea. President Joe Biden framed tensions between the two countries as competition between democracy and autocracy. He has described relations with China as one of the top priorities of his administration. Many analysts, including high-ranking U.S. military personnel, view the risk of violent conflict between the United States and China as relatively low. So, if that's the case, I don't get why there's so much rampant fear-mongering over China. But even when you take out the violent conflict from the equation, then it really should be relatively low as well. But all that saber rattling in the South China Sea, years of heated presidential rhetoric under Trump have domestic implications. Studies suggest when politicians describe the relationship between China and the United States as a great power competition, it stokes anti-Asian beliefs among white Americans. These anti-Asian beliefs, in turn, make Americans more likely to see China as a major threat, according to our own research, one potentially worthy going to war over. We document a vicious cycle of racial animosity with potentially global consequences. I think that last paragraph summed it up well, and I'm going to end off with recommending Danny Haiphong of the Black Agenda Report. He is one of the few prominent Asian leftist voice that we have, and he is the best person to hear break down this dynamic of the China rhetoric that you get from the politicians and how it creates a problematic views, it permeates problematic views, especially in white Americans, and there's no person better to explain that than Danny Haiphong. And he is someone that I would like to bring in as a future guest once the Rochford Files grows. And he is also someone who provides some great analysis on issues where sports cross over into politics, especially breaking down the whole NBA and China issue and how LeBron James coexist and all that. So follow Danny Haiphong on Twitter at Spirit of Ho, and find the Black Agenda Report, the blackagendareport.com. Follow their YouTube page. Also support Margaret Kimberly, the other main person who works on the Black Agenda Report. Next, we've got something that sounds very ridiculous to me. Now, this comes from a tweet from Alex Rubinstein yesterday. And I'll read the photo first. Baja California's Secretary of Health, Alonso Perez Rico, is telling reporters that the United States and Mexico are negotiating an end to border crossing restrictions that have been in place for almost 15 months. According to Perez Rico, the United States is insisting on a few requirements before lifting restrictions. For one, travelers would have to prove they are fully vaccinated in COVID-19, and people who receive the Chinese or Russian versions of the vaccine will be prohibited from entering the United States. The United States is a seriously unhinged country. With all this Russia and China gate that is going in and out of the minds of the propagandized population, seriously. And also worse, don't forget the whole authoritarian view on the vaccines. And I do have an issue with how everyone who doesn't want this vaccine is painted as anti-vax. And restricting travel on against people who don't want this vaccination is authoritarian and a problem in itself, in addition to this ridiculous hate of China and Russia by not allowing people with those vaccines to enter back in the country. Are you kidding me? I've got another story related to vaccines later to talk about. But this is just a absurd statement right here. And anyone who can see through the China and Russia gate, which both sides of the duopoly try to give you through their state media, can see how flat out ridiculous this sounds. And the point is, you don't need these type of restrictions. You're already getting a high amount of the population to get on board with the vaccination. Even the truly committed anti-vax is a much smaller population than what the vaccination absolutist would want you to believe. And you're probably looking at about 60% of people being fully vaccinated at some point, even though by and large it's only going to last about 3 months of full vaccination. So the question will be, do we reach herd immunity? Because if these vaccinations wear off and you fail to reach herd immunity, you're going to see far less people get on board with the idea of doing boosters. People just aren't going to let themselves constantly be poked And plenty of these people gave you the fair double boost. And if you tell them that you have to get shots more frequently than once a year, then there's going to be a lot of people who are just flat out going to be out on that idea. But what thing you shouldn't be for if you're a truly principled anti-authoritarian is vaccine travel restrictions. Especially with the progress we've made on testing, I think that's the last thing that any of those people should be in favor for. And what we've got issues with is the authoritarian left is a lot bigger than you think. And those people think they're leftist in the same way that the anti-authoritarian types are. But too often they capitulate to authority. And they gotta be better. The Supreme Court had a couple of rulings go through yesterday. The first being that the Supreme Court rejects the constitutional challenge to Obamacare 7-2. The court tosses out the lawsuit because the challengers do not have the legal standing to sue. Interesting. Even though the Democrats have largely done watered down incrementalism, including this, imagine if they did something for once that wasn't watered down due to the one-way street of bipartisanship. And Obamacare is an example of that. It was originally a Heritage Health Foundation plan that Mitt Romney was the one who was the original co-sponsor of. But just imagine going one step further than this incrementalism. The public option that President Joe Biden abandoned in the last few weeks of his campaign. Think about if Democrats decided to bring the public, prioritize the public option. Then think about Republicans campaigning on repealing the public option. Then reading headlines of the Supreme Court rejects the constitutional challenge to the public option in 7-2 opinion. The court tosses out the lawsuit because the challenge do not have legal right to sue. Just think about that for a moment. 6-3 conservative majority. Democrats do more than an incremental policy that pleases the left. Then Republicans fail to undo it through the Supreme Court. Just think about that. Because the Democratic Party could be that party who does more for the people, and that's why they're not going to win to keep their majorities in the House and Senate in 2022. And that's the first and main thought I have from this. Because they could be in a slightly better position overall. We could have had a public option for years rather than just be dangled around as a carrot to try to keep people voting for Democrats. And that's what the grift of the Democratic Party is. Tell you a platform full of broken promises, pretend that Republicans are blocking them from it, tell you have to continue to vote Democrats, wash, rinse, and repeat. And my response is, if you want anything remotely progressive to happen, you're going to have to use your leverage of outside pressure. Because that's the only way you're ever going to get this party to ever follow through on giving you more than just crumbs. And this right here is an example of how the Supreme Court, even being 2/3 conservative, still may not be able to block overturn remotely progressive things that Democrats have a chance to pass. Okay, the other Supreme Court ruling says chocolate companies cannot be sued over child slavery on African cocoa farms. This right here is the example of, regardless of how conservative or liberal your court is, they're always going to be pro-corporation. Because the main corporation that was included in the suit was Nestle. And it doesn't matter if Joe Biden even has a chance to bring the Supreme Court back to 4-5. Even if he picks someone less conservative than I expect. And no, I do not believe he's picking anyone left of center. No left of center liberal. He is picking someone at least slightly conservative. And the point is, regardless of the range of potential Supreme Justice that he could try to confirm, they will be pro-corporation. And this is just another example of how the Supreme Court is lost. And even if they ever eventually pack the court, which is another instance about how the Democratic Party was deceiving, especially Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, their refusal to commit one way or the other in order to sucker you into their vote. Tomorrow is Juneteenth. And what message do you send to black people when you say that, when the Supreme Court says that, oh, slavery's okay, in other countries. More okay than here. Yes, such a nice message that you send. Pro-corporation, protecting the corporations, the same corporations who are going to start to virtue signal for Juneteenth. In the same way that some of these offensive corporations already have done virtue signaling for Pride. And capitalism is about to kick in and co-opt this. Once again, this is just another example of how the Supreme Court is lost to corporations. And I think that even if you had a strong left of center liberal majority, they would still come to the defense of corporations in cases like these. They'll concede more on social issues, which is something that really irked the MAGA right, because the point of these Supreme Court nominees was for them to be conservative on social issues as well. So this is the next thing I've got. King Clan X. To be honest, I don't know enough about those three specific groups to have a informed opinion on that. So that's all I've got for now. I could look into it and see if there's some way of providing, if it's relevant to what I'm trying to cover here, but I'm not sure at this time. Alright, next we've got something that's going on in Chicago between the Chicago Bears and neoliberal Mayor Lori Lightfoot. And this is about the Chicago Bears looking into new sites, potentially opening up options for a new stadium. And this is how she responded. Our city is home to some of the world's finest sports teams who have played a vital role in the city's reopening. As part of the city's recovery, many organizations are doubling down their commitment to Chicago, and we expect the Chicago Bears to follow suit. The Bears are locked into a lease at Soldier Field until 2033. In addition, this announcement from the Bears comes in the midst of negotiations for improvements at Soldier Field. This is clearly a negotiating tactic that the Bears have used before. As a season ticket holder and longtime Bears fan, I am committed to keeping the Chicago name in our football team. And like most Bear fans, we want the organization to focus on putting a winning team on the field, being the Packers finally being irrelevant past October. Everything else is just noise. I saw that yesterday, but reading it out loud made it a bit more funny. She's really going to take that shot at her own team. But unfortunately, that's going to be the thing that probably motivates Bears ownership more, even more, to look at a place outside of the city of Chicago. Because the reality is, Soldier Field is over 100 years old, and there comes a point where it isn't financially lucrative to spend on renovating the same thing. I have, this is just common knowledge from when you learn about cost to renovate versus cost to build new. And I used to work at a place which renovated like 12 years, like 12, 13 years ago. Then I learned that it would have cost them less to just relocate into a new building. And they did even more renovations to the place as I was leaving. And this is just another case of what I think the Bears ownership group is thinking, is that it's just cost too much to continue to renovate on renovate on renovate the same place. But unfortunately, certain cities handicap you to that being your only option. And that's what you're seeing go on in the city of Seattle. It's why they lost the Seattle Sonics, is because that city wouldn't allow them to locate anywhere else. And while they are fortunate to finally have a NHL team, they've had to overspend on renovations to the same place when they could have saved money. But when you ask me about stadium financing, I am definitely against the idea of public financing with no strings attached. I think if you use public financing, you have to pay taxpayers back. That would be my conditions to it. And too many billionaire owners have been able to get away with building new venues, no strings attached. And I wish someone would force these owners to be more strings attached if you insist on using public funds to build these venues. So yes, I definitely have more respect for the owners who use more of their own funding. In fact, if you're able to do it completely private, that's the best thing. But it's also situation dependent on and what they replace as well. But this statement that comes from Lori Lightfoot, I feel like this is just going to further motivate the Chicago Bears to building outside of the city of Chicago. And it was also pretty dumb that she thought that a move outside the city of Chicago would mean that it would drop the Chicago name. No. There's been a growing trend of sports teams who are building outside of their city and county. And with like the Atlanta Braves, the Dallas Cowboys, who have always been in Arlington for the longest time. What's another instance of a team being outside the actual city and county? Tampa Bay Rays, even though they've really struggled in St. Petersburg. But yes, it's about to be a growing trend as greater complications happen in their normal city. And I anticipate that and I bet the Chicago Bears are, if this Arlington race course gains traction, they're gonna definitely be more aggressive about the idea of building a new stadium there and getting out of that lease any way possible. Since whenever you see someone who wants to break a lease badly enough, they'll do it. And these are not bulletproof, completely set in stone leases. We've seen billionaire owners who will do just about whatever it takes to get out of them. Before I get into the next thing I'm about to get into is John Stockton. So yesterday a video came out of John Stockton being featured in a anti-vaxxer documentary. And this documentary features some of the most popular anti-vaxxers the most well-known ones. Former longtime Jazz point guard and Hall of Famer John Stockton has appeared in an anti-vaccine documentary, saying things you normally would say in an anti-vaccine documentary. NBC News reporter Ben Collins first let the streets know on Twitter what Stockton had been up to, and evidently he's far from alone. The quote under Stockton, an advancement for this documentary, reads, "One of the things that sticks in my head is losing someone like Steph Curry to basketball would be a crime. I just think what a disappointment it would be if that guy didn't become who he is. So I wonder, who are we missing out on right now?" So this statement is him saying that is taking the more adverse complications that you get from vaccines to the extreme. So this is the first tweet from Ben Collins. John Stockton, yes, that one, is in this particularly over-the-top anti-vax documentary trailer talking about my significant amount of research about COVID-19. The documentary page asks, do masks really work? And how do we really know that a COVID vaccine is safe? Other than John Stockton, this documentary features an all-star team of old-school anti-vaxxers. RFK Jr., Del Bigtree, Andrew Wakefield. It's a 9-part series and I'm absolutely not watching it. Have fun. And there's a clip of Stockton's portion of the trailer. And I'm going to play that real quick. If it allows me to. For some reason, my connection is being difficult today and hasn't been letting me play videos. Otherwise, I'm just going to give you the main gist of what he said. And that was, I have done a lot of research on this topic. And it is insane how much people have been convinced that they have to stay at home in order to, and because of this virus, and how my daughters have been convinced of it, is pretty much what John Stockton said about this. So what I want to say is I have come to the defense of vaccine skeptics, especially of these COVID vaccines. I very well understand the skepticism of these, and I understand people who are afraid of the side effects that would come from these as well. But what I am not for is the anti-vaxxers, the full and truly committed anti-vaxxers who actively try to advocate against any type of vaccines. That is something I will say is too far. And I will be against that. And this right here is a all-time assist leader, John Stockton, by the way, passing up shots. And him passing up shots is part of why they couldn't beat the Chicago Bulls either in 97 or 98. I believe in one of those series, he only averaged like 8 points per game. But the thing is, a truly committed anti-vaxxer like John Stockton isn't even the worst of the other half of the famous pick and roll duel that he paired alongside Karl Malone, a pedophile child's had sex with the children. And is also definitely supportive of John Stockton and his anti-vax views, I'm sure. And these two ending up in Utah for 18, 19 seasons, they couldn't have landed in a better place. And I know this vaccine, and I'm definitely certain this is going to take it to the extremes that even the vaccine skeptics on the left would probably end up having some pretty strong disagreements with. But once again, I said that anyone who tries to even paint the vaccine specific skeptics as anti-vax is wrong and authoritarian. And I see those smears being applied to Bills receiver Cole Beasley right now. And he's not the same as John Stockton, based on my understanding. He is respecting the choice of whether you want the vaccine or not. John Stockton is part of a group actively advocating against the vaccine altogether. Please understand the difference between vaccine skeptics and anti-vaxxers. Please. And if you're trying to force people into getting vaccines, that makes you an authoritarian. And I respect the choices of people who get the vaccine or not. And I am not anti-vax either. I just have an understanding of what has happened in the past with vaccines and how they've been applied to the black communities, such as the Tuskegee experiments, and how they usually experiment on the poor first. But yes, the overall point once again is I libertarian and respect the choice of whether you get the vaccine or not. However, if you're anti-vax, I disagree with you, the people who are strongly committed anti-vaxxers. And there are plenty of points of skepticism among these COVID vaccines. And even if you took it, there's still a lot of uncertainty that you won't know of until several weeks, months, or years down the line. And that you should be willing to be skeptical of what the scientists are telling. So lastly, if we had a better public trust, you wouldn't have to worry about being authoritarian on this issue. The information would speak for itself. And right now we're looking at 60% of the population being fully vaccinated at some point, which I feel is now a better prediction than me predicting 50 some odd percent, especially learning of smaller counties throughout the country who have reached 70% vaccination rates. So imagine what could happen with better public trust. And I think if there's less skepticism involved, you'll easily get 80% of people with proper trust on the issue of vaccines. And that's why there's still a good amount of skepticism on the COVID vaccines. And that's the short of it for now, and I know that I'll continue to have there are more instances of sports and vaccines come up. For now, I'm just going to wait and see the developments of it and just respect the choice. Because this isn't about authority here. It's about trust and data. But what's likely to be misleading data in this documentary is probably going to be counterproductive. So here's some of that lovely Bloomberg propaganda. America should become a nation of renters. The very features that made houses affordable and stable investment are coming to an end. Rising real estate prices are stoking fear that homeownership, long considered a component of the American dream, is slipping out of reach for low and moderate income Americans. That may be so, but a nation of renters is not something to fear. In fact, it's the opposite. The numbers paint a stark picture. After peaking at 69% in 2004, homeownership rate fell every year in 2016, when it was 64.3%, its lowest level since the Census Bureau started keeping track in 1984. But the rate rebounded in Trump's presidency, hitting 66% in 2020. But that trend is likely to be arrested by a housing market desperately short on supply and seeing month-over-month price increases greater than the frenzied market of 2006. My apologies for not realizing that I cannot read any further into this article. Thing is, it's not. This housing thing is they're trying to propagandize you into the idea that the only way forward for you is to rent. But the problem is a human problem. As you seen PragerU tweeted yesterday, whose tweets are now about being half accidentally left. They are human issues. But what it isn't is an issue of the working class. This housing problem that we are currently in and about to embark on much worse is a building problem. It's the problem of the predatory real estate developers, greedy landlords who insist on raising rent well above inflation every single year after every single lease agreement. It is a problem created by greed. We have more than enough empty housing in the country to make sure everyone has the basic right to a home. But no, every single place that is building these generic apartments and townhomes, but they want you to pay well more than what you're capable of making by yourself and what you would struggle to make together. They're creating a market of unaffordability. And the problem is, people are stuck with no other option than to pay rent on a ridiculously overpriced home. And they also have no choice but to live somewhere which probably has more people than you ideally would like. Maybe one example is, instead of just one person in one or two people in your average low-end one-bedroom apartment, you've got 3 or 4 or 5 people in those. Especially if, due to the struggle of how hard it would be to afford said housing. For example, in California, I know it's common for a lot of people to have random roommates that aren't related to the homeowning family or home renting family. And that's due to how overinflated pricing is. And anyone who blames humans for not being able to get a good enough paying job in order to live in the lowest, highest priced, overpriced of housing is deeply out of touch. And that's just being generous. And you still have the possibility of a housing crash. This one happened, first one happened during the most recent housing market crash happened in the second term of the George W. Bush presidency. And we know it's going to happen again. This pandemic, this is going to be the post-pandemic effects. It's only a matter of time. Because people are going to struggle to find jobs regardless of how much more available they're starting to become again. because of the oversaturation of the job market, the overinflation of prices of apartments, homes, townhomes, and the oversaturation of building new housing all over major cities everywhere in the country. It's the thing that's going to lead to the crash. And trust me, the post-pandemic effect is going to lead to a recession. And if you thought this pandemic was the recession, you ain't seen nothing yet. This housing issue is a human problem induced by real estate developers, landlords, owners, and the ruling class. And it's not going to be long before the next crash comes. And the reality is that's the only way people who struggle to afford housing of any type, regardless of how cheap it is, it's really the only way they're going to be able to take advantage and be able to find anything. And don't forget what happens now. Housing is so hard to afford that you force people out of major cities into the fringes of suburbs, into things like mobile home communities. And it's due to everything else being more unaffordable in comparison, and the fact that mobile homes are often in the fringes of suburbs rather than accessible parts of the inner city, because it's not what the corporate real estate developers want. So it's only going to be a matter of time before you get the burst due to all the empty housing units. And trying to manufacture consent to being lifetime renters is such bullshit propaganda. I wanted to end the show on this. Even though I doubt I'll be able to get the video to play, just like the other videos I've failed to get to play. As you see in this video still, Nancy Pelosi is front and center on the singing of a Lift Every Voice and Sing, a song called the Black National Anthem. So I'm going to give it a shot. And by the looks of it, I unfortunately won't be able to play that video either. For some reason, my connection is not allowing me to do stuff like that today. And if any of the videos I had set up were more essential, I would have ended up having to do restart a different stream and try to set up a better connection, improve my connection. We live in a fucking parody. A parody, I said. And it's because Nancy Pelosi gets to be front and center in that performative, just symbolic gesture, just like kneeling with the kente cloth after back in April saying that she thanked George Floyd for dying to be a sacrifice for the movement. A statement which was an all-time ratio on Twitter. Yes, that same Nancy Pelosi gets to be front and center in this performative gesture. The same Nancy Pelosi who has made an effectively all lives matter statement when asked about Black Lives Matter in the past. The same Nancy Pelosi who thinks America is back because y'all voted Joe Biden. So yes, performative queen is front and center. And I know she wasn't the only white person and non-black person involved in this. But come on. Even measuring this on the basis of this performative gesture, do you really have to be front and center in that? And for white people especially, tomorrow is Juneteenth. Keep in mind that giving black people a holiday pales in comparison to the actual policies that could legitimately help black people, like universal health care, which Medicare for All would be the road to that, which would be the most pro-black thing we could pass right now, as said by Nick of the Fred Hampton Leftists. Then don't forget reparations. Another thing that would improve the inequality gap between black Americans and everyone else. Canceling student debt. Canceling health debt. Undoing the predatory loan and finance industries which force black people to pay far higher interest rates on houses and cars. Just an example of a couple of things. Proper defunding of the police, which is at minimum 50%, and it being a road to abolishing the police. The same police forces across the country that terrorizing authoritarian force that focuses on black people. So yeah, there's several other things that would be far more significant for the black community than this holiday, which is only a small positive at best. And if there's one thing clear about the politicians in this country, They only willing to cave on symbolism. Just keep that in mind, that this holiday is only a small positive at best. And actual policy examples like the ones I just went over. And don't forget, that doesn't just apply domestically, that also implies on improving the condition of making sure the United States doesn't actively make black lives worse across the globe as well. They're, these the ruling class is only willing to give black people stuff that they barely want or don't really want to begin with. And the things that are really, and there's still so much more work to do to do things that far more meaningfully improve the condition of black lives in the United States. Don't forget that. I'd like to thank all of you for watching today's edition of the Rochford Files with your host Andrew Rochford. Please go subscribe to the Rochford Files YouTube page, youtube.com/Andrew Rochford. I will eventually change the URL to the Rochford Files once I meet their requirements. Please follow the Rochford Files at twitch.tv/the Rochford Files. Go like the Rochford Files Facebook page. Follow me on Twitter at NugLifeConrad, NUGGLIFE. And the Rochford Files Twitter page at A Rochford Files. And I'll have a Leftist Talk Sports stream on Sunday. I'm not sure the exact time just yet. I would like to start it as early as 7 p.m. Eastern. And I hope to have a group of a few people join me for that. I'll finally test out a Skype room for that one. So that'll be a good one. That'll be a fun one for us. And I'll start to work on some future guests as well. Tomorrow, look out on the YouTube page for the upload of the interview with University of Denver professor, previously of MSU Denver, with Dr. Travis Heath. That was a very good interview. Wasn't quite as long as I would have liked, but I think the quality of it is very strong, and I look forward to hearing the response of that one. And for that being said, check out that video tomorrow. Be ready for the Leftist Talk Sports Volume 3 on Sunday. And this is Andrew Rochford saying goodbye and good night.